It's the week ending Friday the 10th of October, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Israel and Hamas agreeing to the first phase of Donald Trump's peace plan for Gaza, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch announcing that the Conservatives would cut stamp duty were they to win the next election, and the death of bonkbuster novelist Dame Jilly Cooper at the age of 88. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in the Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden, senior editor of The Week Junior, Felicity Capon, and sitting in for Jamie, it's writer and comedian Suchandrika Chakrabarty. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. What a joy.
This week as well, the government are launching a fast-track review on licensing rules. I wonder whether all of you would like to see pubs and bars stay open later or not.
100%.
Yeah, why not? Have fun.
Well, as a parent, any time in the pub is like amazing. If I'm there just with a curfew until like 10 p.m, it's joyous. So the thought of staying out until the pub until 3 o'clock in the morning is like beyond my ken, but I love it.
Yeah, you could just pop out at 3 a.m. after a feed. Why not?
Yeah, put the kids down, pop out.
Harriet, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
British eggs are not enough.
That is the sound of hens in a battery cage system in a video from Par Farm Limited. Harriet, what is the story?
Well, this week, Ukraine overtook any EU country to become the UK's biggest egg supplier. So a lot of people might not know that we actually produce less than 90% of our own eggs and we import the rest. And because our production can't actually keep up with demand, those imports are skyrocketing. But the industry is warning that the fact that we're importing all these eggs means that eggs from caged hens, so in battery cages, are slipping through the back door. And the chair of the British Egg Industry Council says that British farmers are being asked to invest in higher standards of hen welfare while the government leaves the back door open for eggs that are produced in a system that is actually banned in the UK. The number of imports is actually going up so much. So they're up nearly 40% year on year in February, according to DEFRA, because the demand is going up so high and British egg producers can't keep up with that. So some supermarkets, to meet that demand, are importing more and more eggs. Okay,
so it's still a minority, but it's a growing minority. So, Chandrika, are imported eggs as trustworthy as British ones? Are they safe to eat?
Yeah, this could be a bit of an issue. So according to the caterer, more than 80% of Chartered Institute of Environmental Health members, they took part in a survey and they think the imported eggs pose a significant food safety risk in professional kitchens. So 82% of them said imported eggs do not meet the same safety and hygiene standards as British Lion eggs, which is kind of our standard. And you can serve British Lion eggs with a runny yolk, and then there's like different standards on like if you can serve them to vulnerable people, and so that's what we're aiming for. Like if you can have sort of eggs that are not completely cooked, people like poached eggs, they like runny yolks, would it still be safe if you serve one of these imported eggs? And according to the experts, they don't feel that's true. They say 80% believe imported egg products pose a greater food safety risk than UK eggs. So if we're looking at sort of 10% and growing of eggs coming from other countries, they might not be meeting the standards that our experts say are necessary.
Yes, and Harriet mentioned supermarkets, Felicity, and then Suchandrika mentioned catering. You're more likely, I think, to encounter an egg that hasn't got the British Lion standard in a restaurant, aren't you? This is about going to your greasy spoon.
Yes, definitely. So imported eggs are much more likely to be used in restaurants and food processing. And I think that's the kind of the hidden element of this. You know, most people think they're going into a supermarket, they're buying their eggs, they can see it's clearly labelled. We have a sort of rating standards that we have like organic, free range, and it's like ABC, and then non-free range, and then which is colony eggs, I think now, which used to be caged eggs before it was became illegal in 2012. But as you said, in products like your ready meals or a ready-made quiche or whatever, or a food in restaurant, you're not going to be seeing that labelling, and it's much more likely that it is coming from imported chickens that don't have the same food safety standards and welfare standards that I think a lot of British consumers assume that they are consuming.
Yeah, and that, I suppose, Harriet, is the best argument for what your chap was saying from the Egg Federation, or whatever they're called, which is basically the government has to intervene here because you can't rely on consumers. Consumers can say in the supermarket, I want to buy free range or organic, but when you go out to a cafe or when you buy a pre-made thing, you've no idea what's in it. There's no labelling at all.
Exactly. And it's in this sector, in the restaurant sector, where actually it's the most price competitive. So it's much cheaper to be getting these eggs from Ukraine and Poland and Spain and Italy as well. It's significantly cheaper. And actually, there are countries now that are warning. So France has actually confirmed the warnings that that supermarkets, French supermarkets that were selling Ukrainian eggs that contained antibiotic residues that are prohibited in the EU because they're considered to be dangerous to human health. And that's why it's pressing the EU to kind of tighten the border controls around these imports. What's interesting here is that it's a real example of where the UK has diverged from the EU after Brexit, because after Russia invaded Ukraine, both the UK and the EU suspended tariffs on Ukrainian agricultural exports, so like to support the country. And Ukrainian poultry and egg exports just jumped massively to reach an all-time high. But this year, the EU imposed a tariff on Ukrainian imports because of concerns about like cheap products flooding the bloc and undercutting their own producers. And that's why Ukraine has pushed its eggs massively towards Britain. And now we've got the same fears in Britain, where like British egg producers are being undercut by these significantly cheaper eggs from Ukraine because those eggs are not held to the same health and safety welfare standards as the British ones.
That's really interesting, isn't it, Suchandrika? You've got this kind of dichotomy, I suppose. You know, you come up with this policy to support Ukraine because they're being invaded by Russia, and then ethically you have an issue about the treatment of the chickens that are making those eggs. Which one trumps which?
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? I think you have to look after people's health, because an outbreak of salmonella could actually prove fatal for certain vulnerable people. And so you don't want to compromise the health, especially when people can't really check when they're going out for dinner, when they're going to a Greasy Spoon. We don't actually have anything in place so people can say, oh, is this egg British or not, or am I at risk? And so actually going back to the survey, all those members who agree that we should have some rules put in place, and they feel that 86% say that serving unsafe eggs should result in fines, reputational damage, or business closure. So they feel that pushing back onto the business itself, they should like take the blame for using these kinds of eggs, which strike me as like, that really depends on what's happening with egg prices, what's happening with supply chains. That could be a little bit unfair. But then should they have to tell people what kind of eggs they're using? And should they be telling the consumers? This survey also covered how consumers should be informed, and 63% of these experts said that food businesses should inform customers when eggs are not British, so they can change their menu choices. So again, it's really about getting the word out there and also informing people, because this could be a real health risk.
And Felicity, what is the history of the British lion egg? Why is this a big deal here, and how did we get to the stage where we have, pretty tight standards on this stuff?
I think it's a big deal because in this country there was a real push towards free range, and it felt like something that the public really cared about. So if you just go back a bit, before the mid-20th century, almost all eggs in the UK would have been free range. From the 1950s onwards, battery cages came into use, which transformed the egg industry. But due to a range of influences, there was a panic over salmonella in the 1980s. There was also a very influential book called Animal Machines by Ruth Harrison in the 1960s. And then you probably remember this more recently, in 2008, Jamie Oliver launched a massive campaign against caged eggs, and he had a TV documentary called Foul Dinners.
That's what led to Hellmann's mayonnaise being free range, isn't it?
I remember him pushing this Hellmann's representative on TV, being like, will you commit to making all your eggs free range? And this poor guy was like, yes, I will. But I mean, almost overnight, it felt like the public, they really cared about this, and free range became almost the norm, basically. country. So public attitudes change very, very quickly. And I think that's what's so interesting about where we are now, because I honestly don't think that people realise that there is this pushback, that it's starting to unravel. I think, it was such a thoughtful thing. And I would say in this country, we are more a nation of animal lovers than in other countries. And I think there's always been a fairly receptive and concerned audience about animal welfare standards. And every time there's a story or a scandal, you can find it all over the news. So it is very, very interesting that this is now starting to change and go back the other way.
Can't the Ukrainians just make free-range eggs, Harriet? Wouldn't that solve the issue? I mean, we want to support Ukraine. We want to make sure we have free-range eggs. They could still make more profit by doing that than some British farmers, because they have other standards that they don't have to adapt to that wouldn't be problematic to our health.
Well, it's not really feasible, because already the two major Ukrainian suppliers have been described as having super mega battery farms. So firstly, there is a difference between free range and cage free. We outlawed battery cages in 2012, but we haven't outlawed just cages in general. But we're specifically talking about battery hens, where they're all each bird to one cage that's all connected in this kind of horrifically dystopian looking industrial complex. It's not feasible for these two major Ukrainian suppliers to suddenly switch to cage-free or free-range eggs. That's not how it works. And why should they? If they don't have to spend the same amount on food safety and animal welfare and environmental protection as producers do in the UK, they have a big commercial advantage, which is why we're importing so many of their eggs and why they became the number one supplier of imported eggs to Britain this week. And the Ukrainian government is behind this as well. The Ukrainian government wants to push for an extension of this exemption on egg and poultry products. So at the moment, we have a deal with Ukraine that allows this tariff-free imports of eggs and chickens to the UK, which was supposed to run out in March next year. But Ukraine really wants to extend that. So why would they? What exactly would the advantage be for them to do that, when clearly there is a demand that our homegrown industry cannot support, and clearly it is in the best interests of a struggling war-torn economy to keep producing eggs in this way?
So I suppose another way of looking at it from another angle, Suchandrika, would be to say, instead of changing what the Ukrainians do, change what British farmers do. Yes, these standards were long fought for, as Felicity was saying, but maybe it is unfair for British farmers that they have to live up to this when we're importing things that don't have the same standards. Should we lower our standards here?
I wouldn't have said so personally, but it does beg the question of what to do with these eggs then, doesn't it? Why do we have a shortfall? What do we do with them? Are they going to be labelled differently? It is a really tricky question, because it seems as though then you'll create sort of a double market for them, and we'll still have the same problem. I don't think we should change our health guidelines, but a conversation probably needs to be had about where these eggs can be used, where they're safe, if they can't change what they're doing in Ukraine, which at the moment is possibly understandable. There's a lot else going on there, but yeah, relaxing health standards doesn't seem like the move for me.
I think it raises an interesting point more broadly, though, that we are producing less of our food in this country than ever before. The amount of food that we consume that's grown here fell from a peak of 78% in 1984 to 62% in 2023, and it's declining. And I think there is this kind of, again, an assumption or just thinking that the supermarkets are always just going to have food on the shelves, and not realising where it's coming from, not realising how precarious supply chains can become. I think we saw a bit of that in lockdown, but I think most people don't realise that when it comes to eggs, as we're talking about, chickens, potatoes, things that you think that could be grown in this country, they're actually now coming from elsewhere, and that makes us precarious and more fragile than we'd like to be. I think chickens is a really interesting one, because It's by far the most popular meat. There are 33 billion birds on the planet, and that's up from 11 billion in 1990. And as recently as 2020, 90% of the chicken we ate came from the UK, but that is fallen to 82% in 2023, and it's still falling further. And that's partly because of the welfare standards that farmers can't meet in this country. So it's all kind of measured by something called stocking density, and that's how many birds you can fit into a barn. And most supermarkets have their kind of restrictions and regulation is about 17 birds in 38 kilograms per square metre, which is about the floor of a red telephone box. But they want to lower that to 13 birds. And this causes problems for farmers who have to, get planning regulations in place to extend the amount of space they have. They have fewer birds, so it's not as profitable anymore. It's very, very interesting that, animal welfare is such a big deal in this country, but that in turn can also make it very, very hard for farmers in this country to produce that and to meet the demand that we are so ravenous for.
I mean, also the alternative, Harriet, just to finish on this, you're a bird lover. I know you have some birds behind you that we can hear squawking occasionally. I am a hen owner too. Is just have your own chickens if you can afford it and you have some space in your garden. Don't take up that. They're in a little patch behind my garden shed. It's about 2 meters squared, I'd say. And that's enough for 4 eggs a day.
Well, I live in London, so it's not really...
Yeah, that would be worth a million quid.
I don't have a garden. But I think, though, that what's interesting about this story is it just works as such a perfect microcosm of so many wider issues facing the country. Farmers being undercut by cheaper products flooding the market, which is an unintended consequence of Brexit, in that we've negotiated a lot of trade deals, not just with Ukraine, but with, like, for example, with Canada and with Mexico that almost exclusively uses battery cages. And the RSPCA has accused the UK government of a race to the bottom for animal welfare standards in negotiating these trade deals, but also a consequence of how Ukraine is working hard to support its economy, and also about the precariousness of the supply chain and not really understanding where our food is coming from or what might stop it from coming there. So it's just such a snapshot of all the issues that are facing the country. Do
you have a favourite egg?
Ostrich.
Ostrich, Felicity, like it.
Duck. I like a duck egg. No, I think I'm gonna go scrambled.
Nice. Suchandrika?
Poached.
Okay. I'm poached too, but in the form of Benedict. If my arteries could handle it, that would be my breakfast. Okay. Up next, what price comedy? We're off to Riyadh after this. Okay, Felicity, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week will be remembered for a comedy first, but who will have the last laugh?
Guys, it's that special time of year. It's the Riyadh Comedy Festival. And all of your favorite comedians are performing at the pleasure of Turki Al-Sheikh. And he is the head of the entertainment authority over there. And he has so many people thrown in prison because they tweeted stuff he didn't like about the soccer team or whatever, that there's a wing of a prison nicknamed after him where they hang people by their heels from the ceiling. Now, there's a lot of drips, killjoys, and dweebazoids who are saying, they shouldn't do comedy over there because it's whitewashing a regime that just in June killed a journalist and killed Jamal Khashoggi and played a big role in 9/11. Shut up.
Comedian Zach Williams poking fun at comedians who are not poking fun at whom this week, Felicity?
The Saudi Arabian royal family, pretty much, because this is the first ever comedy festival to be held in Riyadh in the Conservative Kingdom, featuring a mostly all-male lineup, including some of the biggest names in comedy: Jimmy Carr, Jack Whitehall, Kevin Hart, Russell Peters. I could go on and on and on. On Friday, one of the few female comedians taking part, Jessica Kirson, apologised for her participation and said she would be donating her fee to a human rights organisation. So she kind of faced a backlash from her fans, and she has since expressed sincere regret for having performed under a government that continues to violate fundamental human rights. She defended herself somewhat by saying that the organisers said that she could be an openly out as a lesbian on stage and perform gay material, and she hoped that could help LGBTQ plus people in Saudi Arabia feel seen and valued. But overall, this is caused an absolute stink, as you can imagine, about the ethics of performing for some quite hefty sums of money in a kingdom that still perpetrates massive human rights violations. And one of the things that is sort of being debated a bit is whether they were given contracts that prevented them from speaking about certain topics. So one comedian who didn't take part shared what looks to be part of the contract that said you cannot poke fun at the royal family, the government, or it said religion, but I assume it meant Islam. So the kind of the gagging and the lack of free speech about what they could or could not say at this comedy festival.
And yet the stink that's been caused, Harriet, is a stink in every other country of the world, if you like, apart from Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they're very grateful, it seems, that people have come and performed for them. The gigs seem to go well. Does it matter what people in other places think if you're laying on a comedy festival in a country and inviting some big guests and they agree to come and they're paid? What's the problem?
Well, I suppose this is all part of Saudi Arabia's wider push to launder its own image on the international stage. So the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has personally organised and paid for massive amounts of high profile events featuring big recording artists and celebrities and sports figures over the past few years. It's all part of the kingdom's Vision 2030, which is basically its plan to diversify the economy away from oil and boost foreign investment and tourism and effectively enhance the image of the kingdom on the world stage. So to rebrand away from all the torture and the executions and the sexual violence and the arbitrary arrests. And it's no coincidence. This has also been major. We've spoken on this podcast about sports washing and about Saudi Arabia's incredibly enormous investment in sport over the past decade. So Saudi Arabia has become this kind of global player in sports and culture, and many cultural organizations around the world are doing deals with the kingdom. So in that sense, I think you could say that the impression and the stir that this has caused among other countries is slightly counterproductive to what they're trying to achieve. But on the other hand, it has been an enormous success. They did manage to get the biggest names in comedy, some of whom have professed to be outspoken defenders of free speech, to come and perform in their country under these allegations of restrictions on what they would say.
Suchandrika, this is your world. How do you feel about the comedians that have accepted this invitation? And have you ever confronted yourself to think how you would respond if you were approached to perform?
So I have to say I was not asked to perform amongst these names. I will say it does look to be two female names. I think that is very telling, and a lot of the names on it are people who like to dance that line of I'm cancelled, I'm not cancelled, or have actually been cancelled in the case of someone like Louis C.K. Do they know everything that Louis C.K.'s been up to?
Louis C.K. has not been cancelled.
He has been in terms of he faced backlash to how he had treated women, but in terms of his career, no, it's thriving. It is absolutely thriving. But in Saudi Arabia, do they know what he does to pot plants and women? If they did, is there something in his contract? Are they happy to have someone like him coming over? So there is a case of comedy washing here, without a doubt. They're doing with comedy what they've done with sport. They're choosing particular people they'd like to see on the stage, which is not women. So Olly, you shared a piece from Omar Dajili about why he went. And I do think that each person does have slightly different reasons. Jessica Kearson's different reasons around, LGBTQI plus sort of representation, but in the end she decided that it wasn't good enough a reason. And Omar Dajili says in his Guardian piece that he talks about how women can now drive since the last time he was there, and he made some jokes around male drivers, and it was positive about women. But the fact is there's only one woman on the lineup after Jessica Kearson went who could be making these jokes, and that's Whitney Cummings. There's no other women. So in terms of who they chose as well, I think they're showing who they are. The Saudi government, the Saudi royal family, they're kind of saying, yeah, come over dudes, ladies not welcome.
But progress happens slowly, Suchandrika. You wouldn't expect the lineup at the first Riyadh Comedy Festival to look like one in London or New York, would you? And, that is Jalili's point in this article for The Guardian. He says, quote, allowing international performances in Saudi, especially comedy, subtly broadens what's thinkable and sayable in a society. Every laugh at a taboo subject shifts norms, albeit slightly. Bear in mind, slightly is a seismic movement in the Middle East. Dubai is a very different place now to what it was when I first performed there in 2008. And there is something to that, isn't there? I mean, if it is analogous to Dubai in 2008, then the point is that by having Western comedians, like him with a Middle Eastern background in particular, slowly poking fun at the country, then, by 2035, you might be in a position where it would be now with the Dubai Comedy Festival, where no one would, say anything.
Is this a government that does well when fun is poked at it? Is it welcoming fun? Is it welcoming dissent? Yeah, it's let women drive, but to the polling booth? I can understand some people having different priorities for why they went. Aziz Ansari said his set went really well. He is up there, and he's representing like the labourers who are working in those areas are often of Indian background. And so for them, it was important to see him up there. But what can they do with that? The actual, the paths for dissent haven't suddenly appeared just because some overpriced millionaires have gone to do comedy there. Actual, political change hasn't happened. There is no greater safety for dissent. What they've done is make the government and the kingdom look a little bit better, look like they should be in the conversation with other countries that do have these rights and do have these freedoms. And that, in my opinion, is the same as sports washing. It's just as bad.
Okay, and you didn't answer my question about whether you would accept an invitation.
I would not accept an invitation.
Regardless of what the fee is, because we've seen fees reported here in six figures. So 200 grand for an appearance, 15 minutes, you're saying no? Absolutely
not. Number one, what would they do to me if I did step outside of the bounds of what I should be saying as a woman? And number two, I'd love to see Whitney Cummings's contract. Is it slightly different? Because it strikes me with their lineup that they are not very keen on someone who is not a man.
Okay, Felicity, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I mean, I think for me, I've seen a lot of comedians and how they have defended their appearance, and I don't have a problem with them going to Saudi Arabia and performing and starting a conversation and all of that. What I object to is that they can't be more transparent about the fact that they have been clearly been told what they can and what they can't say, because to me the whole point of comedy is that you speak truth to power and that you punch up and that no one is off limits. And I find it very nauseating that they have accepted these huge sums of money and will happily be gagged about certain things that they can and can't say.
If they're the kind of comedians that would say those things. I mean, to be fair, some comedians do anyway, just do material about their relationship. And so, yes, they've signed the contract, but they were never in danger of making points about Mohammed bin Salman because they talk about their wife's shoe collection and that's their routine.
Sure, but I just think it's so glaringly obvious to go to a country with this very authoritarian regime and not mention it at all. It's the elephant in the room. And when we talk about human rights abuses, this isn't just about women can now drive and before they couldn't drive. According to Human Rights Watch, the festival began just months after the authorities executed a journalist for his public speech, so for what he said. So people are being killed. The festival took place on the anniversary of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, this US-based journalist and a fierce critic of Saudi Arabia's government. I mean, that was in 2018, and that was a real crisis that, really severed links for a while between Saudi Arabia and the West. But there has also been an 8-year crackdown on many of the country's writers and activists. Like we've been saying, authoritarian leaders don't like being mocked. You saw that with Navalny always poking fun at Putin, and Putin couldn't handle it. So I don't have a problem with comedy. I don't have a problem with them opening up conversations in Saudi Arabia. I get that. But to not make jokes about the thing that should be mocked the most, to me, just doesn't ring true. I mean, another defence that people have been talking about is that a lot of Saudis are young, and they're saying, we are not our government. Don't cut us off from the outside world just because you don't agree with our government. Come to us, we want to hear the gay jokes and the trans jokes and the sex jokes and all of that. And I get that. I'm all for a conversation, and I don't want Saudi Arabia to be shut off either. But you've got to mock the elephant in the room. That's got to be spoken about.
But then if that's the case, there's no comedy in Saudi Arabia ever, right? Because they're not going to... The elephant in the room is Mohammed bin Salman. He's not going anywhere. No one's in any danger of replacing him. So then what you're saying is they can't have comedy at all.
I don't think that's what is being said. I did see one argument come from Alex Falcone, who's a comedian from LA. And I think he made a very good point when he said that there is a difference between performing in a country and performing for a country. So this is not that they are performing comedy in Saudi Arabia. This is a government-backed festival that is designed to launder the image of a regime. That is not the same as performing comedy in Saudi Arabia. Another thing to consider, I think, is that someone like Jimmy Carr, who's co-headlining the festival, didn't even list his appearance in Saudi Arabia on his website or his social media. So in the past, he's been such a defender of free speech. He's called himself a free speech absolutist. So the accusations of hypocrisy among these so-called free speech activists, I think, do carry quite a lot of weight. There is something to be said for what Omid Jalili says about comedy and about shifting the cultural norms, even just slightly. But then, on the other hand, the idea of a lesbian female comic performing for a regime that has imposed the death penalty on same-sex relationships and has imprisoned women for speaking out for women's rights, that is, it really exposes the flimsiness of that argument. I'm not saying that these comedians shouldn't perform in Saudi Arabia, but they are performing to launder the image of Mohammed bin Salman and his regime.
Yeah, I mean, there's also maybe something slightly disingenuous in using Omid Jalali as our source here, Suchandrika, because he's kind of unusual in that he is from a Middle Eastern background and maybe would have gone to perform in Riyadh for 500 quid. But the bottom line is most of these comics, especially the ones from the United States, especially Jimmy Carr, they're there for the money. Like, there's no noble reason that they're there. It's very clear that if it was a country with equally appalling human rights records that was paying them 500 quid, they would not have gone.
Yeah, it's a very cynical move on all of their parts. It seems to me that it's like kind of an exercise in SEO in some ways. Like now, if you're Googling Saudi Arabia, this is what's coming up, this is what's in the news, and it pushes down the anniversary of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. And they don't just keep it within the kingdom either. People who are dissenters, who have left the country, they are not safe when they leave Saudi Arabia. And it pushes down all of these issues and all these real problems that Saudi Arabia wreaks on their own people and when they're outside the country. And then instead we're talking about this, which is it's a show with paid jesters in the court.
The only thing I would say to counter that is the sheer amount of publicity this has been generated, and every single article does mention Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses. If anything, I wonder whether it has slightly backfired in that I feel that, you know, the name Jamal Khashoggi is now back in the news and people are talking about Saudi Arabia and this very dodgy regime going on. And I wonder whether they slightly wish that it hadn't caused such a fuss, because people are not only talking about the comedy. I mean, I haven't really seen much of the actual comedy acts, but I have seen all the opinion pieces saying, you know, what a dodgy regime this is.
The BBC article, I do think the BBC article about this festival is a classic example of what we're talking about, because there was a whole paragraph on, you know, there's been this big push towards women's rights over the past 10 years in Saudi Arabia, and now they can drive and now they can this, and it's such a catastrophic failure of journalism to not interrogate that, because for every single headline piece of, oh, now women can drive, oh, now women can this, oh, look how great we are for women's rights in Saudi Arabia, underneath it is the wider, brutal, intensifying crackdown on dissent and women's rights and progressive values. So that article in and of itself was just such an example of the kind of laundering that we should be better than that.
Okay, well, you don't have to assemble your favourite comedians in the desert to spend time with them. You can hang out with them on your phone. Find out how after this. So, Chandrika, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week the social media got too real?
Zelda Williams, who is the daughter of Robin Williams, has had enough of people making AI videos of her father and sending them to her. She took to her Instagram stories asking people to stop, and this is what she had to say. Please just stop sending me AI videos of dad. Stop believing I want to see it or that I'll understand. I don't and I won't. If you're just trying to troll me, I've seen way worse. I'll restrict and move on. But please, if you've got any decency, just stop doing this to him and to me, to everyone even, full stop.
TikToker devotedly yours. Reading out some comments there from Zelda Williams. Suchandrika, who's that and what's the story?
So Zelda Williams is the daughter of the late Robin Williams, a comedian and actor, and she is now having people sending her AI-generated videos of her late father, and she went to her Instagram stories and she's begging people to stop, and she says, please stop sending me AI videos of dad. It's not what he would want. It's maddening, it's upsetting, and people can now churn out horrible TikTok slop, puppeteering them, meaning celebrities, well-known people, and it's maddening. And so she's hit upon something that I think is really concerning, which is how much more improved AI videos, AI audio is becoming, that we are going to be seeing a lot more of this type of video. So OpenAI have launched Sora 2, in the last week, and it's their video generator model with AI. It's accessible as a dedicated app in the US. You can't use it in the UK at the moment. I did try, and it's invite only, but it is seen to be a huge improvement on what they had before, and it can create much more realistic videos than what we've had.
So yeah, this is, as far as I can tell, a sort of TikTok-like platform. So you scroll through as a user videos that you're interested in. But rather than them being videos that anyone's actually filmed with their camera, they're videos that are generated by users inputting a few words into a prompt and it generating videos for them. Is that right?
Yes, you can kind of make them do anything you want. So possibly something they would have done in real life, which then you can see leads to people believing that a person did something they didn't do.
Okay. Harriet, what's the point of that?
Effectively, OpenAI is trying to create an alternative to TikTok with only AI generated content, because you can generate videos of yourself and your friends with a feature called cameos, which basically allows you to put your own face or your own self into videos. The first day that it launched, an OpenAI employee claimed that it had posted the first viral video because they created effectively a deep fake of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman shoplifting hardware, computer hardware that's necessary to run AI systems. At the moment, the monetization is very much in question, because even Sam Altman has said that OpenAI is going to have to somehow make money from video generation. And already Sora 2 is seeing people generating way more videos than they had expected. I mean, the problems are so immediately evident, not least the privacy concerns about uploading and scanning your own face and inserting yourself into AI generated scenarios. But there's so many copyright issues, because within days, Sora's feed was just flooded with AI generated videos of copyrighted characters like SpongeBob SquarePants, like smoking a joint, or South Park characters dressed up as Nazis, or Pokemon and Rick and Morty. And just 3 days later, OpenAI had to massively crack down on this with a new copyright policy, because before, their whole thing was that if you didn't want your copyrighted material being used, you would have to opt out. So like any branded content would be fair game. But they've had to revise that really, really quickly, because the legal issues are obvious if your intellectual property is being used in these AI generated videos to do whatever people want. So there's real issues there around intellectual property and copyright as well. But the point of this, just as the point of everything that OpenAI and similar AI companies launch, is monetization, because all of these tech companies are burning through unimaginable sums of money and ravaging the world and the environment with the data centers needed to power the large language models, and all the energy that uses, and all the water that needed to cool it, that we've spoken about on this podcast so many times. Everything about the AI bubble rests on whether these products can actually be monetized, or whether, like what we're seeing with Sora 2, they're just this kind of brief novelty that's creating a never-ending deluge of slop.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's the reason then, Felicity, if the reason is to make money out of it, This is a strange way to go about doing it, isn't it? Same with ChatGPT, really. Releasing the product for free and then just seeing who needs it, then creating the expectation that it's free, and then Chinese companies come along and copy it. It would make sense if you created something like Sora 2 and said, right, Columbia TriStar, you can buy it for $100 million a year and we'll help you make your effects-driven movie. But to help insert me into a Madonna video, how is that monetizing it? That's just cheapening it. Well, it's not going to end up in anything.
Presumably the problem with the copyright is that aren't they leaving themselves open to being like sued?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's why it's that's probably going to be the thing that makes them, regulate and change things, because they're so worried about being like sued by everyone left, right and centre. But yeah, I mean, on the creative side, I just can't really see that this is particularly creative. I can't see why on earth you need to insert yourself into every imaginable scenario. It seems very kind of like self-indulgent to be like, I must be in this Madonna music video. So the whole thing just feels like we're at the on the frontier of AI, and it's like Pandora's box, and everything awful comes out, and it takes a while for us to like regulate and be rational and be normal, because it's not just all the copyrighted characters in like compromising situation, but there's like graphic violence, there's graphic racism, there's just like the kind of the worst excesses of humanity seems to immediately come out every time there's like a new innovation in AI, and then it takes a little bit of time for us to remember that we are like civil and can do this in a nice way. I just don't think we need another social media platform. I don't think we need it. I don't think it's creative.
Okay, well, I agree, clearly. Suchandrika, do you? Or do you think there is a positive side to this? I mean, I was trying desperately to look for some when we were researching this, and I did stumble across a video that someone had made, which is kind of in your world, I suppose, because it was a satire. They had managed to, and it is remarkable, the effects are remarkable, worth underlining. It's amazing a LLM has done this. But they had created an advert for Epstein's Island in the style of a 1980s toy commercial, with children gasping and playing with little figures. And as a piece of satire, it was kind of funny. And it did look like something from a sketch show that would have cost thousands of pounds to film, and they'd just done it with a prompt.
Yeah, the ratio is not great, is it? Finding one kind of semi-decent video when there's a lot of terrible stuff out there. I found in PC Magazine, they had a journalist try out Sora 2 and see what it was like to use. And he sort of tried out other earlier versions. And he said it is significantly better than the ones he's tried out before, which is quite concerning, because that leap in quality doesn't necessarily come with a leap in media literacy. And so we go back to this problem of like people believing the stuff that was on Facebook during elections. There are going to be more elections always. And what do these videos add to that? Just more disinformation, more just crap to get through as well. So to find like actually good content, what is this going to do to search engines? It feels like an overall bad thing to throw out more slop.
But it's also just, it's kind of ruined social networking, Harriet. That's the other thing. You know, for those of us elderly millennials who quite liked Facebook when it started, you know, a way of just keeping up to date with what people I actually like and know are doing, I now miss. I just get all this crap all the time.
Yeah, I think a crucial piece of background to this story, why we're calling it Sora 2, is that at the end of last year, OpenAI already launched Sora, which effectively, for anyone that hasn't used it, you put in a little text prompt and it creates a video. So either animations or actual photorealistic footage. And even though the videos were pretty rubbish, like they're nowhere near as good as Sora 2, the ramifications in less than a year have already been huge. Not just for Hollywood and for content creators, for filmmakers, I think that's obvious. And for politicians as well, because now any video can be created at any time of a celebrity or a politician saying something that they didn't, and it's incredibly convincing. The implications for democracy, the threat of disinformation, and the threat to intellectual property and copyright issues that we've talked about. But even in less than a year, already most social media platforms are just flooded with AI-generated slop. And it's becoming more and more difficult for most people to distinguish between real and false content. Now, the volume of content now with Sora 2 is going to increase dramatically But we think that the proportion of quality content is going to diminish, because why would you make something that takes months or years and takes a lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of money when you could do it so much cheaper and quicker, even if it's not as good? This is all part of what's known as the enshittification of the internet. And in terms of monetization, I think it's worth noting that Mattel, which is the biggest US toy maker, they've actually just partnered with OpenAI to test this Sora 2. And you can understand the implications of that as well. Like a big company with a lot of valuable intellectual property like Barbie, if they partner with Sora 2, they can do away with an entire studio creating like a Barbie movie when you can just do it with prompts. The cat is out of the bag.
And that mention of Mattel, Felicity, brings us on to another point here, which is toys. You can see how toy makers will feel more and more comfortable with integrating AI into their products, because it allows children to have that personal experience with their toys that they fantasize about. I imagine that Barbie and Ken are talking to me. Well, now they can, and I can be in the video with them in the dollhouse. As parents and, as readers of your magazine, The Week Junior, how do we deal with this oncoming onslaught of fakery?
I don't think it's clear how we deal with it. I think parents are going to have to be, very vigilant, basically, about what they expose their children to, because AI is one thing. AI in the hands of some of the most impressionable and vulnerable people, children, is an entirely different thing. And I think parents are really grappling with how to navigate this world for their children, because it is such a new thing still. And I mean, even chatbots, I was reading some examples of parents who will use chatbots when they're just too frazzled and too stressed, or they've got too many things to do, and these chatbots will have these amazing long conversations with their kids. There's personalized.
My kids talk to Alexa. It'll start with, what's the oldest person in the world? And then when she provides an answer, there'll be a follow-up question. I suppose that is a conversation with AI, isn't it?
And it goes on and on and on. And there's personalised bedtime stories and all these things for kind of stressed out parents is very, very attractive. But the research into how generative AI affects children and their development is still in the really, really early stages. And, you have to remember that this is not a real relationship with a sentient being who wants to talk to you and engage with you and cares about you. And it distorts reality. It distorts what children think is real and isn't real. AI has not been designed with children's best interests at heart. And we've seen it with lots of other, iterations along the journey of, recent technological breakthroughs. You saw with YouTube and Facebook that it took them a decade before they launched products for under 13s. There's been a recent kind of fever about social media and screen times for kids. But AI like this and chatbots is like a whole other thing that parents are going to have to get their heads around, and could be very, very damaging. There's been cases of children who have killed themselves after becoming obsessed with LLM-powered chatbots. So it's really, really serious. There could be a lot of good. I feel that this is a very basic thing to say, and what we always say with AI. There could be a lot of good, but there are also serious harms, particularly when it comes to children.
On which note, my thanks to Suchandrika, to Harriet, and to Felicity. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. None of us are AI generated. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can now watch us as well. And if you would like some non-AI generated news summaries, may I recommend The Week magazine. You can get 6 free issues of that with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. You can look at it online if you want to take some time out from screen time. Just read the magazine and put your phone down. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to Unwrap next week, bye-bye.